I got to start with the obvious question. I want to start with your background. You've got an art history and philosophy major, yet you're doing software development. You got to tell me that story.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I wish it sounded more romantic, but I was a painter. I was trying to sell paintings and show in galleries, and I was working really hard at that. And as part of that, I needed to do a little tech. Back then we sent slides to people, and I needed to print slides and stuff. So I got into computers to help automate that. I started using Claris FileMaker to help automate that. And then I needed a job, and I wanted a job that would leave time, for painting. So I started making FileMaker applications for people and realized that it scratches the same itch as making paintings, but without that kind of like confrontation with your own self-worth.
Right.
And, it's rewarding. It's this, it's very much like you get to make something and then see its effect out in the world. And it became the thing I wanted to do instead of paint.
There is definitely a creative element to what we do, despite it being technical. Now, you've come at this then through a development perspective. FileMaker is one of those products, though, that tends to be in a lot of places, particularly small and mid-sized places. So you've got experience in what we've talked about. Development's changed a lot over the time that we've been doing that. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you was you've been involved in the low code movement. Help me understand what's low code.
I mean, that's kind of one of the things I want to talk about. I don't know that any of us are really sure.
Okay.
But one of the clearest explanations comes from Salesforce. If you talk to Salesforce admins, they make a pretty clear distinction between two kinds of work they do. And they'll sometimes describe it as clicks, not code, or declarative versus programmatic. And what they're trying to get at is that I don't need to know Java or Apex to accomplish a certain set of things. And I do need to know Java or Apex to accomplish another set of things.
Okay.
And that's one way to think about this low code thing. I mean, in some ways, I think FileMaker was low code. I could show a FileMaker script to my mom or a friend who wasn't a programmer, and they could read it because it read like English.
Okay.
And at least when I was growing up, that's not what I thought code looked like. Right? I thought code looked like code, like it was, quote, encoded.
Right.
And so we've always had like readable languages, but this low code thing is trying to get beyond that to something that's even more of a guided experience for the developer.
Okay, that's interesting because your explanation there ties into something I've been telling my listeners a lot, which is the idea of be building on platforms and be building on something like a Salesforce. So this actually ties in really well. So help me understand, there's another sort of pair of related phrases, which is kind of pro code when you add it to that no code. What does pro code and no code fit into that?
Yeah, so I guess no code is literally I'm filling out some kind of form.
Right.
And I want to, I think we've all used like a WordPress plugin where you want to add something to your WordPress, you just fill out a form and you're done. There's nothing that looks like code.
Okay.
I couldn't make a syntax mistake in that environment, for example.
Right.
And then pro code is, I think, of what we think of as like you're in a text editor of some kind and you could make a syntax mistake. And I think that one way I think about this is that the outcome of both of these things is the same. That form the user fills out when they're coming to your website, their experience is the same, whether that was generated declaratively or programmatically. The difference is in the level of control the author or the developer has.
Okay.
Pro code, you have a lot of control.
Right.
And with these other things, you have less control. And I think that's the interesting part is like how much control do we need in developing solutions for customers?
So if you've migrated from building products around FileMaker towards what you're doing now, the product you're working on right now is a product called DayBack, which you call a hackable calendar. Mm-hmm. How does that fit into this coding approach, thinking about the DayBack product?
Yeah, so I think that our DayBack users have the same spectrum of issues that anybody wrestling with no code has. They find the calendar itself, the platform, very expressive, and they can do a lot with it and fill out forms and make it behave the way they want. But when they want to go further, when they want a finer level of control, they need some way to inject a more expressive description of their goal into the platform. In this WordPress analogy, it's like putting some JavaScript into the head of your page.
Okay.
You gotta do a little something, right? Maybe that's just bringing in a whole other platform, right? Like a Zendesk help button.
Right.
But you're adding some code. I guess one of the things where it kind of seems weird to talk about no code for me is if I'm copying and pasting a block of JavaScript that I don't understand into my WordPress site. I mean, I'm literally moving code from one app to another. But is that really, but it's kind of low code too, because I don't need to know what it does. I didn't need to author it. I'm just kind of tweaking it. And I think that's a lot of what developers are doing now, especially when they're tying these different apps together.
So talk to me then a little bit about the inspiration of DayBack. Like was that driven by your problems you'd heard from customers, from owners that you talked to? How did that start?
So two sets of problems. One, just a personal problem of time management. Partly got to have a job but have time for these passion projects. And then the job, you end up making promises to customers and you can't keep them because you don't know what's ahead of you and you don't know how to budget your time. And then we were really delivering at first anyways, we were delivering to other developers. And we realized that they had a hard time making, the web doesn't like to make grids, right? It likes to make lists. So anything that looks like a grid, like a calendar or a Gantt chart or Kanban, is just tougher. And so we wanted to make something that a scaffold that they could kind of run with. And these two things lined up. And so we ended up making this very customizable calendar at first for developers and now kind of for anybody.
Okay. So one of the other things that besides talking about no code, because some of my Patreons have been asking about that, the other thing that caught my attention that I wanted to ask you about was you've been using calendars to tell stories. I found that really fascinating. The kind of the three big examples is you've got a way of showing the US COVID-19 response. You've got the way of showing women's suffrage through as a story, or voter suppression. Like, how did you come up with that? The idea of telling stories through calendars?
Well, part of it started with wanting to look forward. We wanted people to, the problem we were trying to solve for ourselves is we can make plans for 2 weeks out, but you really need to make plans for 2 months or 2 years out. And so we invented this calendar that could look at longer timescales.
Okay.
But nobody could experience that because nobody really has meaningful events in their calendar 5, 10, 15 years into the future.
Right.
So one of my colleagues was like, but we all have this shared past. And if we could show people that they could see their shared past in a surprising way, then that would show them the power this calendar had. And so we started thinking about meaningful stories out of our shared past. And with this election cycle and with COVID coming up, it was just clear that there were these stories about our past, like the right to vote and women's suffrage, and then what's happening with COVID, that we could tell stories about this shared past that people could see in a new way. Personally, everybody has on the team has found a lot of other use cases and other small stories that they want to tell. And it's also changed our vocabulary when we talk to businesses, because now when we talk to businesses about planning or charting or capacity, all these issues that you're running into as a small business, right? Like The smaller you are, the line between having too much work and not enough work gets super thin. Right. And so now we're saying, hey, there's story, your calendar, your schedule is telling a story about your future. Mm-hmm. What you should probably know what that story is. Is it a story that I don't have enough work, or a story that I don't have enough resources? Is it a story that we're slammed or we're behind? And so it's given us a new way to talk to our customers, which has been pretty cool.
So if a lot of my listeners tend to be coming from an IT infrastructure perspective, and one of the things I've been talking about is the idea of leveraging platforms like a Salesforce for them to start thinking about not moving beyond just the computer pieces, but to the stuff above it. If they're starting to think about this low code movement or no code, how would you direct them to kind of get started on thinking about that?
I think there are two things to look at. This is a great question. This is where I have the biggest question. We're looking at two kinds of things. One is all the nodes, the endpoints where your data lives, Salesforce, QuickBooks, Zendesk, they're building out low-code integrations to other nodes.
Okay.
So that you can bring your help desk stuff into email, or you can bring it into Salesforce, or you can bring invoices from Square into. So that's one thing. The nodes are building their own. And then there's a whole layer of application providers that are building middleware for this, like Work2, Zapier, Node-RED,
right?
That are letting you craft these interactions in a kind of declarative way, so you don't have to figure out the QuickBooks API.
Right.
I think that the decisions that a lot of small business IT are going to make is whether they're going to put their integration logic in a middleware layer like Zapier, Work2, or Node-RED, or whether they're going to choose endpoints based on how well fleshed out their low-code connections to other apps are.
Okay.
And if I had to put chips in there somewhere, I would say that the nodes have a better incentive to build richer connections between them than these middleware applications do. And I've seen this in Salesforce already. Like the integrations between Salesforce and Zendesk, for example, are much richer than what you can do using Zapier between Salesforce and Zendesk.
If listeners wanted to get in touch and understand more about what you and your companies are up to, what's kind of the best way to do that?
We tell a great story on the site, just dayback.com, and the election timelines are there. If you want to see, what does it look like to look at a Google Calendar that's, 180 years long.
Well, I know I spent a bunch of time poking at it before this call. Well, John, thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Really great talking to you. Thank you, Dave.